Good evening, everyone, and thank you for watching. My name is Nick Phillips. I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor for this event, and as the state's voter election agency, Clean Elections hosts debates so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. Candidates that have a contested primary election have been invited to participate in this debate. Candidates that have opted into the Clean Elections Clean Funding Program are required to participate, while traditional candidates are invited and encouraged to attend. Tonight, we have 3 Democratic candidates for the House of Representatives participating. When voting in a primary election, voters are choosing between candidates of the same political party, so their preferred nominee may advance to the general election. As the moderator, I'll do my best to ensure that candidates have the opportunity to engage directly with their respective opponents this evening. The questions that will be asked tonight are coming directly from voters. Leading up to the debates, Clean Elections conducted outreach to voters across the state, asking for questions for these candidates. Additionally, Clean Elections surveyed voters to learn what issues are important to them, and this survey data, along with input from journalists at the Arizona Capital Times, Arizona Agenda, and Green Valley News and Sahuarita Sun, have been utilized to guide the discussion so it best serves voters. And of course, we want to hear directly from you, any voters that are watching this evening. So if you're watching this debate live, you can submit a question at any time by emailing debates@kc-a.com, by sending a text to 480-808-1814, or by calling the number 480-937-1253. Please be prepared with your question and be ready to say if it's for a specific candidate or for all candidates. We screen questions for clarity to eliminate duplications or personal attacks on candidates. And this debate's scheduled for about 90 minutes, so we might not get to all the audience questions, but we will do our best. Now for the candidates, you're going to have 1 minute for your opening and closing statements and 1 to 2 minutes for your responses to voter questions. We're encouraging an open exchange of ideas and dialogue between opponents. If you feel the need to respond to another candidate's comments, you may do so, but I may limit responses for time management purposes. And I'd like to remind all the candidates that this is a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. Our goal tonight is to connect candidates and voters so our electorate can vote informed. So without further ado, I'll briefly introduce the candidates. As I mentioned, we have 3 Democratic candidates for the House of Representatives. First up tonight, we have Annalise Ortiz, then we have Ana Abetia, and finally, Hector Jaramillo. Okay, and the order in which you folks are going to speak has been determined by alphabetical order by last name. So I believe this evening, that's going to put Ms. Abetia first. So we'll go ahead and start with opening statements. And Ms. Abetia, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks to the Clean Elections Commission for hosting this debate. I'm so excited to be here. I was born and raised in Maryville, and I spent my teenage years between Glendale and Phoenix. I'm a proud product of the Cartwright School District, where I attended Spatonley Elementary and Atkinson Middle School. Getting involved in my community was something that came naturally to me. My grandparents were civil rights activists and instilled in me the importance of being politically engaged and standing up for what is right. And I now serve as the youngest governing board member of the Cartwright School District. Since graduating from high school in 2014, I worked on numerous campaigns here in Arizona, and I knew that I needed to do more than help Democrats get elected and pass ballot initiatives like Invest in Ed or the legalization of marijuana. I love what I do for my community on the Cartwright School Board, but I realize there is more work to be done here in order to fully advocate for the improvement of our schools and communities. That is why I'm stepping up to run for the House of Representatives. I am also taking a stand against special interest dollars as the only person in this race that is running as a clean elections candidate, because my focus is representing the people of Maryville and Glendale and not special interests.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move to Mr. Jaramillo.
Hi, my name's Hector Jaramillo, and I'm running to be your state representative in District 24. I'm a first-generation American, son of two immigrants born in Phoenix, Arizona, and a product of public schools here in the district I was raised. With the value of helping others and ensuring all members of community are taken care of, those were the values I was raised with. I'm running this year because of the lack of action and results for working class families in our district. I'm running to be your advocate and your voice at the Capitol. My measure of success as a candidate is not whether or not I win, and not about building my own resume. It's about the results and actions delivered for the people of District 24. This campaign is about fighting to increase the minimum wage for working families in Arizona. It's about having affordable healthcare and being able to afford your medicine and needed medical care. I'm running to fight for a better environment and water safety for our community. I'm running so that small businesses can thrive in our district. I'm running so teachers can get the pay they deserve and for students to have the funding and resources they need to be successful. These will be the issues I fight hard for and will take them to the state capitol.
All right. Thank you. And final opening statement from Ms. Ortiz.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Annalise Ortiz, and I hope you will vote for me to be your next state representative. I was born and raised in Arizona. I grew up in a big family of 6 kids, and I'm a former journalist and ASU graduate. Through my past work at a civil rights organization, I worked closely with the 29 House Democratic members to ensure that bills that would have restricted our right to participate in democracy and our right to access reproductive health care were defeated over the years. And that experience is going to be crucial because more than half of the Democratic members in the House will not be returning next year. So we need a candidate who can hit the ground running on day one, and I have that experience given my extensive work in legislative advocacy. I also successfully advocated to ensure the Dignity for Incarcerated Women's Act was signed into law last year with bipartisan support. I do this work because I'm an auntie to 6 kids who I love very much, and they're growing up in an Arizona where their public schools are severely underfunded, where housing costs are skyrocketing, and where water is running out. They deserve better. All of us deserve courageous and compassionate leadership to deliver bold solutions on these urgent problems, and I hope to be that representation for Maryvale and Glendale. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we'll move on to our first question from voters. This one's a little bit of a warm-up, and I'm going to explain. I think I neglected to mention earlier that we're going to rotate the order in which I give out the questions so that we don't always put Ms. Avetia on the hot seat answering first. So this next question, we're gonna go first to you, Mr. Jaramillo. And the question is, how long have you lived in District 24? And if you recently moved here, why?
So I've lived in Phoenix, Arizona my entire life. I moved to District 24 about 8 years ago. And in those 8 years, I've attended Apollo High School, which is in the district, and I've attended Glendale Community College, also in the district. And I moved here because I moved with my family. I was young, so I'm a product of this district.
Okay, Ms. Ortiz.
I moved to Maryvale last year when I was priced out of my apartment in Central Phoenix. I've spent my whole adult life jumping from apartment to apartment where rents could be raised at any minute and where it's really hard to build community. So when I found a house for rent within my budget in Maryvale, I was so happy to put down roots in a community that I love, that's rich in culture and history, and where I'd done work before. And I am so happy to have a permanent place to call home, and I am looking forward to continuing to organize alongside my neighbors to improve the lives of people in Maryvale and Glendale.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Avetia.
Yes, I actually have very long roots here in the community along with Arizona. My grandparents on my dad's sides are 4th generation Arizonan, which makes me a 6th generation Arizonan. And my grandmother moved to Phoenix from Chicago in the 60s and moved right into Maryvale on 51st Avenue and Verde Lane. Because my parents were young when they had me, we lived with my grandma for the most of my life. And when my parents split when I was 6, I ended up spending most of my teenage years in Glendale as well as Maryvale. So I really don't know much other communities outside of Maryvale and Glendale. From time to time, I did move around, but I've always ended up back over here. And I now have a house that I rent out of the community, and I am a proud product of the district.
All right. Thank you, guys. This next question will go first to Ms. Ortiz. and we're going to start talking about education. So the question from our voter is, what kind of support do teachers need in the classroom? How can state lawmakers assist them in getting what they need? And what are they not getting from the current legislature?
Well, I want to start by saying this is a great question for Teacher Appreciation Week. So thank you to all of our teachers who might be watching and who live in the district. The first thing that I want to say is that this issue is incredibly personal to me. I'm a product of Arizona Public Schools. My mom is a pre-K assistant and my dad's a community college professor. And throughout my childhood, I remember hearing my teachers talk back then about struggling to buy school supplies out of their own pocket, about having to take on a second job. And our teachers today are still facing that severe underfunding. So the biggest thing is we need to fund our schools adequately. We need to stop being the lowest funded in education in the entire nation. We've had that history for a long time, and it is about time that we pay our teachers and support staff what they deserve. And we also need to stop the attacks that our legislature continues to put on our teachers, trying to micromanage the way that they teach. So that's incredibly important as well. And we need to ensure we have social and emotional learning in place for our students who are experiencing a really tough time with this pandemic, and our teachers are experiencing a tough time as well. So that kind of trauma-informed social and emotional learning and space for that kind of development is critical as well.
Okay, thank you. And what would be your response, Ms. Abetia, to this question?
I'm sorry, can you, there was multiple questions in this, right? Could you repeat them for me?
Yeah, so the voter wants to know what kind of support you think teachers need in the classroom, how state legislators can give that to them. And if you think about the current environment, what are teachers lacking in terms of support from the legislature at present?
Thank you. So I think it really comes down to the funding, the lack of funding that we have here in the state of Arizona when it comes for education, for public education specifically. That's actually one of the biggest reasons why I decided to step up and run for this position. Being a school board member, it makes it extremely difficult to do the things that we're meant to do in a local government when we do not have the adequate funding from the state to provide for our teachers and for our scholars. It's very important to fund for special education, for fine arts, for all of our STEM. Our district is growing. Currently in our district, our schools are rebranding into to different programs. So each school has something specific that they are bringing to the district. For example, we have one school that is focusing on STEM, while another school is focusing on arts, and while another school is focusing on communication and journalism. But in order to provide for these programs, we need to have more adequate funding. It is nearly impossible to do our job as board members and as educators when we do not have the support that we need. I also know the struggle personally because I grew up with my mom being a teacher. She started off as a kindergarten aide and worked her way up through school to become a math teacher. And my mom does not make the greatest of money, and she continues to pay out of pocket $500 to $1,000 every year to pay for supplies in her classroom. We need to make laws that are appropriate for its funding, appropriate for teachers, and appropriate for our students. Currently, there are so many attacks that are coming after our educators and after our scholars in the state, and we need to do better. We need to provide for them better, and we need to have educators and people who care about education down at the legislature fighting for these things.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jaramillo.
Happy Teacher Appreciation Week. I've worked as a teacher aide before. My girlfriend, my best friend, and my uncle are all teachers. I'm a huge supporter of teachers all around Arizona. Recently, Arizona Central published an article about a superintendent receiving $1.7 million in additional compensation on top of their base salary of $189,000. Teachers in the Buckeye Elementary School District have asked for a 2 to 3% raise recently and were denied because the board told them that there was not enough money. And they also defended their decision by saying the superintendent worked hard. And I'm sure the superintendent worked hard, but the teachers have worked tirelessly. I don't know if you've ever met a teacher, but they have to pay, like Anna said, there's out-of-pocket costs for their classroom where they're expected to maintain a certain look with an already underfunded salary. It's clear that voters want better public school education as well. With Prop 208 being passed, voters clearly said that they want better public school systems. And yet a Republican majority in the state legislature gutted that. And then later the Prop 208 was overturned by Judge John Hanna. The will of the people has been denied by a minority. All of this in a state where teachers are already underpaid and expected to pay out of their own pockets to run their own classrooms. If I'm elected, I will fight to increase the funding for public school teachers and to increase funding for classroom functions as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next question was submitted by a voter, and it's specifically for Ms. Avetia. You were going to go first in this next round anyway, so we'll go right to you, but I have a feeling that maybe some of our other participants would be interested in answering. So if you've got something to say, you can let me know. And the question is, what can be done to improve education for students with special needs?
Thank you. So special needs classes are tragically underfunded by the state and federal government. We need to increase the pay for special education assistance and increase the funding for resources to support in-class learning. Having firsthand experience in a special education classroom for life skills immediately taught me that we do not support special education staff adequately. Most classes do not have enough assistance to the number of children, and when there aren't enough resources to fit the sensory needs and the educational needs, their IEPs are not met. Having adequate funding to allow more assistance in the classrooms gives the teachers in the class the opportunity for time to create and update proper IEPs. I noticed too many students did not have their IEPs properly up to date, and this was difficult to do with little help and no time.
Okay, thank you. And all right, we'll go to Mr. Jaramillo. Yeah, you're raising your hand. Good.
That's a great question. My day job is a therapist for children with autism. So I understand the need for children with special needs to receive the support that is required. Currently, there are wait lists all over Arizona for kids ages from 2 to 5 years old that are waiting to receive essential therapies. Now, during this critical age, they're missing out on opportunities to learn how to wash their hands, how to properly hold a fork. And without the funding that we need to open up more centers for rehabilitation, we won't be able to give these kids the help they deserve and need.
Ms. Ortiz, do you want to chime in on this, or?
Yeah, I definitely agree. We need funding. And we need to be sure also that the class sizes are reduced. And that's something that I believe is a struggle as well for special needs students. So absolutely, we need additional funding. We need additional staff and retaining those teachers and those special education assistants who have the experience and the passion for what they do, and making sure that we pay them strong wages, strong benefits, and give them the training and resources they need to be successful and to stay in long careers in their school districts.
All right, thank you. So continuing on the issue of education, we'll start this next question with Mr. Jaramillo, and that's, what legislation do you think the Arizona legislature needs to pass with respect to education? And as a Democrat, how would you work to advance some of these priorities if the Democratic Party is in the minority?
Prop 208, that's easy. And now with our surplus in our budget, what was it, over $5 billion in surplus money? Most of that money has come from gutting social programs like education. That money belongs in our public school systems, in a place where, like we said before, teachers are underpaid and the classrooms are underfunded. I will work tirelessly to help fight for teachers' rights and their salaries to be increased, like this bracelet says, save our schools.
Okay. Ms. Ortiz.
We almost had a crisis this year because of the aggregate expenditure limit, which threatened to strip millions from our schools and potentially would have had our schools actually close their doors and have teachers and support staff laid off. So I would love to see the aggregate expenditure limit done away with, because it is a funding formula from the 1980s that does not fit our 21st century classrooms. I also would like to see voter-approved funding streams respected from the legislature. And we absolutely need to take a look at reforming the funding formula, especially because we should have an opportunity rate in there where it doesn't matter what your zip code is and where you live, you have an equal opportunity to have a strong community public school. And that is just common sense. And that equity issue is critically important, especially for our families in Maryvale and Glendale.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Abetia.
I agree with Ms. Ortiz on the aggregated expenditure limit being tossed away. As a new school board member and learning the ins and the outs of what it takes to be a school board member and the expectations, when we were dealing with the aggregated expenditure limit, we had many parents that wanted to support us and back us and fight down at the Capitol against this because this is money that is already allocated towards us, but then being said that we can't use this money until the state allows it. It's ridiculous that school districts have to go through that struggle. We also have a surplus of $5 billion, and we have permanent and multi-year programs that 1.57 billion dollars are being funded into these programs. I believe that a majority of the funding should be going to education, including community colleges, and maintaining what should be going into community programs like after school programs for our schools.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, and then we're going to move on to another subject. This one, we're going to go first to Ms. Ortiz. And the question is, do you think ESAs should be expanded in any way? Or if you had the chance, would you vote to eliminate the ESA program entirely?
I don't believe that ESAs should be expanded. I think we need to strengthen our public schools by investing in them, expanding special education programs, offering strong extracurriculars and career technical education options. And we need to raise wages again. But expanding school vouchers and the school voucher program gets us further away from this vision of having strong community public schools by funneling our public taxpayers into our public tax dollars into private schools and special interest charter schools. And we know that wealthy private and charter school profiteers are capitalizing off our kids, hoarding taxpayer dollars, and in some cases, handpicking their students. So we need to see greater oversight and accountability from charter schools. And I do not think that the school voucher program is the route that we should be going, because the public tax dollars belong in our public neighborhood community schools.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Abetia.
I don't think that any public money should be going to anything other than public schools, period. We don't spend enough money on education in Arizona, and voters don't think so either. That is why I and many others worked hard to get the Red for Ed ballot initiative passed, and why voters voted for it, because we need to fund for education. And this does not properly fund for education for public schools.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jaramillo.
This goes back to our teachers being underpaid, our classrooms being underfunded. The ESA program is an excuse to defund public education and shift the money back to private schools. I do not support ESA, and we need to fund our public schools, pay our teachers, and support our classrooms.
Okay. All right, thank you guys. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about economic issues. So our first question here is going to go first to Ms. Abetia. Inflation is, causing rising costs for consumers around the country, and particularly here in Arizona. And the question that we have from a voter is, what will you do specifically to get our gas prices back down under $2?
Sorry, I thought I was trying to get to the unmute. I don't think that suspending a gas tax will help us get down back to $2. I think there's a serious issue as far as the rising costs at the pump everywhere. I think that if we can lower the cost of living struggles in other areas, it'll make it more affordable for people to provide for gas. For example, if we're providing programs like food stamps and healthcare to families, middle-class families and low middle-class families. It reduces that financial burden to provide for gas for themselves. I know for myself, there are times where I might only have $60 on hand and I'm not getting paid for another week or week and a half. And that $60 needs to stretch not only for my gas, but for my food for the week, for any, household supplies that I may need. And sometimes it's a matter of, how much am I going to put in gas? Am I going to put the full 60 or am I only going to put in $20? But if I have these financial burdens released in other areas, it makes it easier to provide myself for that gas.
Okay, just to go back to something you mentioned at the beginning of your answer, would you support suspending the gas tax, or you're saying you're not in favor of that?
I don't think I'm in support of suspending the gas tax because we do need a gas tax in order to provide for to fix roads and transportation in that area. So I don't think it's a very serious solution, but I think that finding other solutions in other areas does relieve the stress.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Mr. Jaramillo.
Sorry. All right. I do support temporarily suspending the gas tax. We need to find every possible solution that can alleviate the burden on people living here. District 24 has a lot of working and middle-class people. They're not paid very well, and I'm working to fight for increasing the minimum wage to alleviate the burden on healthcare costs and implementing measures such as rent control. Because in order for that people to afford to pay the bills, we got to help protect, lower the cost of everything.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ortiz.
Yeah, I'm talking to families every day as I'm going out and knocking doors who are really concerned about just how they're going to meet their bills at the end of the month or the end of the week. I do support suspending the gas tax temporarily, just to ensure that people can have a little bit of relief while we also provide the urgent solutions of bringing down the cost of rent and housing, making sure that we are providing assistance and making it easier for people to get assistance for childcare, healthcare, food stamps, and other things that they might need to make it through whatever struggle they are going through. And I think the temporary suspension needs to be a well thought out plan where we have backup funding and we figure out how we're going to pay for those essential needs that Anna talked about with the roads and other infrastructure that does need that funding. And so that is something that I would support on a temporary basis.
Okay, Mr. Jaramillo,
Can I just add something?
Sure.
We have a $5 billion surplus. We can afford to suspend the gas tax.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. And I want to ask you all to elaborate on something that came up in a few of your responses, which is the rising cost of housing. Obviously, Arizona was at one time known for its housing affordability, but prices have been increasing of late. So tell us, what's your plan for improving housing affordability? And specifically, what role does the legislature have to play in this issue? We'll start with Mr. Jaramillo on this one.
So there was an article in AZ Central about a family facing, oh, sorry, something popped up on my screen. So there was an article in AZ Central about a family facing a 50% rent increase, almost $800 more a month. In a state with stagnant wages and a lack of union protection, how can any family afford a 50% rent increase? This is the reality that many renters and families face in Arizona, being forced to downsize their living spaces, looking for roommates, all while working 40 hours a week. This is a reality that should not be acceptable for legislators to let their constituents live in. As your state rep, I will fight for rent control, a policy that protects working and middle-class families from being forced to pay absurd rent increases. Working and middle-class people already bear the burden of paying more to keep the state running, and I think it's time for the state to pay back the favor.
All right, thank you. Ms. Ortiz.
Yes, I agree with Hector here. The most important and urgent thing that we need to do is stabilize the housing market by limiting how much a landlord can raise rent. In my zip code of 85035, the rent has increased 129% since 2015. That's according to an Arizona Central article. And this is forcing families, senior citizens on fixed incomes to go through the trauma of an eviction in many cases. And in other cases, folks are being forced to live in their cars or hotels, and this should not be the reality in the richest nation in the world. This is just unsustainable. So, but there are some other steps that I think we absolutely need to take along with limiting rent. We need to also perhaps work with city leaders to provide more housing options through creative land use solutions and ensure that any new housing options remain affordable. And we must put money into the Arizona Housing Trust Fund, which is something that we could do with the budget surplus. And finally, we need to hold predatory investors accountable, because let's be clear about who's doing the harming here. There are investors out of state who are coming here, buying up all the housing and selling it at inflated rates. And in many cases, for some voters that I've talked to, they're blowing up their phones with text messages and calls asking to take their homes. So it is imperative that we get control of the investors and the predatory actors here who are taking advantage of our communities.
One issue you brought up, rent control. If I could ask you one follow-up question. Right now in Arizona, there are some municipalities that would be interested in implementing a rent control type policy, but there are state prohibitions on that. Do you think that the state's role should be a state level rent control policy, or withdrawing restrictions so that municipalities can make decisions for themselves?
Are we going in order, or you want me to
That was
answer
a follow-up
first?
directly for you, because
Yes.
then we're going to go to Ms. Abetia for this question.
Yes, so you're exactly right. We need to overturn the preemption law that you're talking about, which ties city leaders' hands so that right now they can't even consider rent control if they wanted to. And that we need to return that local control. But I do think that seriously looking at proposals on the statewide level for the potential of having rent control, whether it is a certain percentage that is raised each year that accounts for inflation, but opening the door to the conversation is the very first step that we need to take. And we can do that by overturning that preemption law. But I do think it's because this is something that's impacting us statewide. So we need to start looking at statewide solutions as well.
Okay. All right, we'll go to Ms. Abetia, the question about rising housing costs for you.
Yes. So like I stated earlier, my mom is a teacher, and even with her salary, she is not able to afford the home that she was living in. She currently had to leave, find a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate, and downsize because of the possibility of her being evicted within the next couple of months. I will propose checks on the unregulated takeover of single family and rental properties by investment firms, invest in rental assistance and first-time homebuyer programs, and will advocate for strengthening tenants' rights and limit how much landlords can invest and raise the rent. I do believe we need a cap on renting because currently in my mom's in the example of my mom, she was renting her home, and every couple of months it was being raised a couple of hundreds of dollars. And it's nearly impossible to live like that, not knowing if the next month your rent is going to be raised. We also need to propose legislation to strengthen regulations and improve transparency among HOAs.
Okay, thank you. For those folks who are just joining us on the live stream, we're here speaking with 3 Democratic candidates for the House of Representatives in Legislative District 24. We're talking about economic issues. And if you're a voter watching this right now, I'm asking questions of the candidates that are coming directly from voters, and we'd like to hear from you. So on your screen, you should see options to email, text, or call in the question, and I'd encourage you to submit one now. There's plenty of time, and hopefully we'll get to it this evening. So we'll move on to another question that has already been mentioned by you folks in talking about these economic issues so far, and that's, what's your plan for roads and infrastructure in this state, and could you be specific about 2 priorities you have in that area? So we'll start with Ms. Ortiz.
Yes, this is the top issue I would say one of the top issues that I hear from people in the community when I am talking to them about what issues matter most to them. We have a tremendous amount of traffic in the West Valley, and the public transit is not accessible and often has delays and concerns about being able to easily find public transit. So I think investing in public transit is a huge priority for me, especially because of the environmental, positive environmental impacts that switching to more public transit would bring for our communities when we already have increased air pollution here in the West Valley. The second thing that I would like to see is improvements of our roads. There are far too many just basic maintenance issues that are causing problems for people in our communities. And there are basic, speeding and speed bump solutions that people want to see. And so working with city leaders to be able to make those kinds of concerns, make it easier for people to find who is their representative, how can they get the help that they need urgently, and how can the state and city and county work together to meet these common concerns of neighbors, because it is a huge quality of life issue, and we need to be sure we're being responsive to the people who we work for.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Avetia.
I actually agree with Ms. Ortiz 100%. Again, living in Maryville in the West Valley for my entire life, I know firsthand the struggle of using public transportation to get to school. When I was in high school, I had to travel from 59th Avenue in Northern to get all the way down to 12th Street in Thomas to attend school. And there were days where I just didn't make it to class on time, to my first period class on time, because of how long and how jam-packed our streets were with traffic. I also, living in this area, our streets are not paved correctly. There are potholes. There are not enough speed bumps. People in our community constantly complain about the speeding and the drag racing that happens in our community, and they want speed bumps. They want people to be safe because of the children that play in our neighborhoods. And providing for that sort of infrastructure here in the West Valley in particular, not only does it help make our streets safer and provide better, but it also beautifies into our community, and that's something that we also need.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Jaramillo.
I completely agree with Anna and Annalise. Like Anna, I used to take the public transport system from Apollo High School to my job on 67th Avenue in Thunderbird. And in that, the buses were often overcrowded and the bus drivers were really underpaid. I want to support and expand our public transportation because it's an essential form of transportation for many people, and including those with disabilities. And I want to make that more accessible to them. And along with improving our roads, I was talking with a neighbor on around 62nd Avenue and Bethany Home, and they complained to me that, Cardinals Way is such a beautiful street, but if you continue down, it turns to Bethany Home. And then if you continue going down Bethany Home, you start getting potholes and all sorts of blemishes on our city roads. And they just want their roads fixed. They complain about how they paid all these taxes just to be ignored, and for those taxes to be used on roads where they don't even live, and they're the taxpayers.
All right, thank you. We've got just one more question about the economy, and for this one, we'll start with Ms. Avetia. And a voter wrote in, how will you, what would you do to address homeless issues if elected?
That is a great question. Here in the West Valley, we do have a crisis of homelessness, and we need to address a few things in order to get to that. The biggest thing that we need to address is the mental health crisis and the substance abuse crisis here in the community. I personally suffer from mental health, and I do come from a family that has suffered from substance abuse, and I know firsthand the struggle of where that can put a family and the community. We need to provide and create more community programs and community shelters here on the West Valley. Right now, there's not many that I can think of that we, can provide for people here. But in downtown Phoenix in particular, that one can tend to be overflown. And we have a problem with it in downtown Phoenix as well. So the people here on the West Valley, they know that, and they know that it is a waste of time for them to try to travel down there. And chances are they're not going to get a bed for the night. We need to provide in this community for homelessness, but we also need to address the crisis of mental health and substance abuse.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jaramillo.
So homelessness is a serious issue here in Arizona. I've been looking at creative solutions to tackle this problem. In Finland, over in Europe, what they've come up with is actually giving the homeless free housing. Now, I know that sounds like a ludicrous idea to many people, but what they've actually found is that by giving homeless people homes to live in, they're able to shelter themselves, they're able to prevent more visits to the hospital, and they're able to get jobs to support themselves and then raise a family and then eventually paying taxes. So what they found in Finland is that not only is it the right thing to do, it's cheaper on taxpayers, and it actually creates revenue and stimulates the economy. So free housing for the homeless is something that I would definitely look into for Arizona.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ortiz.
So the most important thing for me is to approach this issue with compassion first and foremost. If you take time to talk to somebody who is experiencing homelessness, they very often will open up to you about serious traumas that they have experienced throughout their life that put them in the situation where they are. So we need to address the root causes of homelessness to prevent people, especially our youth, from ending up in this situation in the first place. And one way we can do that is by investing in healthcare and housing and mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment. But for folks who are currently experiencing homelessness, we absolutely need to invest in low barrier shelters. And what that means is a safe place where a person can go to rest their head at night, where they can bring a pet, bring their personal belongings, and where addiction is not a disqualifier, because addiction is incredibly complicated. And we need to be sure that there are trained professionals who are providing the resources that are needed when somebody is experiencing addiction. And once someone is checked into a low barrier shelter, I think it's crucial to have wraparound services available to them so that we can get them the healthcare needs that they might have, and that we can also get them a long-term housing plan, a long-term employment plan, and get them on a pathway of success.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk a little bit about the environment. So this next question, we're going to go to Mr. Jaramillo. Arizona's water supply from the Colorado River is being curtailed with further cuts expected in the future. Where and how do you think the state could find more water?
So water conservation is a global issue. I think it's predicted that water will be the next petroleum over the next 50 years. And it's unique because if we play politics with it and ignore it, we just cease to exist. As a society, we seem to believe that water is an infinite resource, just like the residents of Cape Town did. If you don't know, Cape Town was on the verge of completely shutting down their water supply to 4 million people. With extreme conservation efforts, they were able to postpone the shutdown of water and cut their water use by more than 50%. Here in Arizona, we can prevent such a crisis by implementing measures now, from using more efficient irrigation techniques to planting plants that actually belong in our desert and don't require much water. We can survive and thrive in our home that we call a desert. And I plan on working with environmental scientists from our colleges and universities to come up with more creative ideas to protect our water.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ortiz.
I am from this desert. I love it dearly. I want to call Arizona my home forever. And I want my nieces and my nephew to be able to call it home forever if they choose to. But the prospect right now is really scary. We have to admit that. We are in a climate and water emergency, and it's caused by climate change. And unfortunately, Republican leaders have ignored this problem for far too long. And now we are at crisis levels where Lake Powell and Lake Mead are drying up. So I think it takes two prongs. We need to have the conservation efforts, and we need to be serious about those conservation efforts. People are going to have to make sacrifices, and corporations are going to have to make sacrifices. And when you ask about finding more water resources, well, we need to properly fund the Department of Water Resources, which, like many of our other state agencies, has been neglected and severely underfunded over the years. And when we do that, we can invest immediately in upgrading water infrastructure. And the last thing I want to say is that we need immediate regulations on groundwater use, because right now, out of state and foreign corporations can go to rural Arizona and they can suck out groundwater from our desert without any regulation, oversight, or consequences. It sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, and it has to end. And we need to also make sure we're making that urgent transition to clean energy to slow the impacts of climate change, which have got us to where we are in the first place.
All right, thank you. And for you, Ms. Abetia, how can we find more water for Arizona?
So I agree with Hector. I also believe that we need more conservation for efforts for water. I don't really know, to be honest, I'm not too familiar with the issue of water. As I'm learning that at the doors, I know that this is a high concern, and that this is something that I have been doing research here and there on. And with the issue of not having enough water here in our state, I don't know if there is a place where we can just find water and create water. But I do know that it is a crisis here in our community. It is a crisis not only here in the state of Arizona, but all over. And we need to be, we do need to be better at conserving our water and finding programs to be able to help provide that, along with something that Ms. Ortiz said with the climate issue that's happening. We need to be better at conserving our energy because we do have a climate issue, and that is something that has brought us here today. But as far as finding new water to bring to Arizona, I don't know if that's necessarily possible. But again, this is something that I am educating myself on as I continue to talk to voters.
Okay, thank you. Well, as some of you mentioned, obviously, there's two parts to the water issue in this state, and adding to our water supply would only be part of that. Conservation has to be part as well. So we have one voter writing, how will you help your constituents adjust to the diminishing water supply? And some of you mentioned this before, but I think this question is really inviting you to be specific about that reality. So Ms. Ortiz, first on this one.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that we need to get back to being a community that cares for our neighbors nationwide. We are in a moment where we are going to need each other. And what that means is assessing how we can conserve in a way that ensures those who are most in need, whether it is senior citizens, people with young children and young babies and families, how can we be there for them if they are in need of resources, and making sure that we are helping one another. That is one of the biggest things. In terms of adjusting, we can start with the things that are pretty low sacrifice for us to do, like changing out nice green lawns into having rock lawns instead. That is one small step that we can take immediately, that we can encourage our neighbors to take part in. And then the other thing would be making it cheaper to make our own, to have our own energy conservation, like solar power. I talked to one voter who really wanted, and I know this is off the water issue in particular, but going back to the broader issue of climate change and renewable energy sources. I talked to one voter who really wanted solar panels and he couldn't afford them. And there's somebody wanting to do a sacrifice in their personal life to cut down their carbon footprint, and they couldn't afford it. So how can we find ways to make it more affordable and more accessible for everyday Arizonans and our communities in Maryvale and Glendale to have access to clean, renewable energy in their own homes and their own lives?
Okay, thank you. Zavetia.
Yeah, so I think that we need to make sure that new that there's new technology that conserves water that is affordable and accessible. I also believe that it shouldn't be the burden of the everyday people living here in Arizona to carry on that burden of reducing water. I believe that there are big companies out there that purchase water at a very low cost, and we need to have them conserving water as well. I think it starts from the top down, and I believe that that will help relieve the stress of our community as well.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Jaramillo.
What was the question again? Can you repeat it?
How will you help your constituents adjust to the diminishing water supply in the state?
Well, much like what Annalise said, it's all about community networking and making sure your neighbors are taken care of, your family's taken care of. Unfortunately, one of the things that I've noticed is that people tend to think the burden of water supply is on us, when in reality, most of it is on big corporations and other industries, like Anna mentioned. I believe it was around 70% of our water use is used by the agricultural industry. And like I mentioned before, one of the ways we can reduce our water footprint is by using more efficient irrigation techniques and shifting our diets a little bit, maybe eating one less burger a month or something, because a lot of liters of water go into making that one burger that you eat. I think it was around 35,000 liters of water go into making one hamburger patty.
Okay,
Can I add something to my answer?
please.
Yeah, completely agree about, let's hold big corporations accountable as well. But on your note about diets, Hector, there are Indigenous organizers that are doing incredible work to help people find ways that they can be growing and then consuming plants that are indigenous to this land, that are healthier, and that can really have an impact on the sustainability issue. And so that was a great point, and I just wanted to shout out the many Indigenous organizers who are doing this work across Maricopa County to help us be more mindful as well about diets.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to ask you all a specific question that we have from a voter. What's your stance on EPCOR's wastewater consolidation program, and would you do anything to block its continuation? For this one, I think we're going to start with Ms. Avetia.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this question.
Okay, I think that's fine. This is a pretty specific question, so
Yeah.
I think voters can reach out to all of you guys afterwards and maybe start that dialogue. Mr. Jaramillo or Ms. Ortiz, do either of you guys want to respond to this question?
What was the question again? Can you repeat it?
What's your stance on EPCOR's wastewater consolidation program?
I'm not familiar with that either.
Yeah, I would need to do more research.
Okay, well,
Happy to connect with the voter.
We'll just
Same.
move right along then. We'll go again to Ms. Avetia. We'll call that a scratch. How can you work on making your city easier to travel by foot, bike, or on the bus?
Yes, so I believe we need to provide better into our public transportation, again, here for the West Valley. I believe we need to expand the light rail into this area as well. Currently, it takes, just from my house on 51st Avenue and Thomas to get to the light rail on Thomas and Central, it can take about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour on a weekday. And on a weekend, the buses only run on every hour. So for those who are trying to get to school, get to work on the weekends, it's nearly impossible to get there on time. So I do believe that we need to provide more into our public transportation. I do also think that we need to have more community events and programs that are related around to walking and cleaning up the streets, and also, more bike programs. I know that in Central Phoenix, there are so many groups that get together on their bikes, but that is something that is not in the culture of the West Valley. And so bringing programs and bringing community events like that here into the West Valley, I think would really make people enthusiastic about getting on their bike and taking a walk instead of, hopping in their car.
Thank you. Mr. Jaramillo.
So I mentioned before that I used to take the bus from Apollo High School to my job. And I mentioned that the buses were often overcrowded. Like Anna said, the bus routes go every hour, and with more funding, we can increase it to every 30 minutes. With those every 30 minutes, people may be able to make it on time to their class, like Anna back in her days in school, and people may be able to make it to work on time. And it's cheaper and easier on our carbon footprint because, again, climate change is a very real thing, and reducing the amount of cars that congest our streets and contribute to the emissions in our atmosphere is a good thing. So not only that, but I also want to invest in bike lanes. I want, like Anna said, I agree with her completely, to invest in our community and make sure that we encourage bicycling and make it fun and make it a family event so people are happy and smiling and,
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Ortiz.
We definitely need to have a focus on making our streets safer for pedestrians. There are far too many people who lose their lives while trying to get to work or crossing a crosswalk. And so, excuse me, I'd really love to see more hawk lights and crosswalks in our areas, which are do you know what that is, Nick? I can explain it.
I'm not, please, yeah.
Yeah, they are the flashing light crosswalks where it actually stops traffic. So it's not incumbent upon the pedestrian to necessarily make sure there's no traffic, but there's actually a red light that comes up so that the traffic has to stop. And I think it is so important to add more of those. I know there was one recently just added in my community near 75th Avenue in Thomas. And I would really like to see more of those hawk lights so that people can truly safely cross the street and walk around and bike. More bike lanes is huge. And then definitely agree with expanding light rail into the West Valley and expanding more rapid bus systems that hopefully could be electric buses.
Okay, thank you.
Comment?
Yes, please.
I actually agree with Annalise on I don't even know how to pronounce it, the hawk lights.
Yeah.
I got it right. Okay. I agree because as a school board member, we constantly have issues with transportation for some of our walkers and our bike riders. And so having that extra safety precaution, especially near our schools, is a crucial part of making sure that there's safety for our young students. A lot of students would actually prefer to walk or to ride bikes to school if there was more safety, and more parents would appreciate that more as well if there was the safety measure put ahead in place.
All right, thank you. Okay, I want to move on to a few questions about immigration and border issues. As I'm sure you guys are all well aware, in one of our nearby states, Texas, Governor Greg Abbott deployed the National Guard to the border. There's been pressure on Doug Ducey to do the same here in Arizona. So can you talk about what you think the state's role in managing border issues should be? And as a representative, would you work with the federal government on this issue? We'll go first to Mr. Jaramillo.
So Governor Abbott of Texas implemented the National Guard to the border in Texas. What that ended up doing was costing them billions of dollars in lost revenue from lost produce at the border, products arriving late, and it effectively damaged their trade relations with Mexico. Mexico was scheduled to build a rail between Mexico and Texas, and now they're talking about doing it with New Mexico. And that whole it was a political stunt what Abbott did in the border. Very much so that the army down there, the National Guard, has started to unionize because conditions there are horrible. I do not want such a situation to happen with Arizona. Our trade relations with Mexico are important, and implementing such unnecessary and stressful policies just to what Greg Abbott did was galvanize his base is not necessary at all. I do not want Arizona to lose billions of dollars in revenue. I don't want Arizona to lose tons of lost produce. So Arizona should keep trade relations with Mexico intact and not implement such a disastrous measure like what Texas did.
Okay. Go to Ms. Ortiz.
I was a reporter along the Texas-Mexico border in 2014, and at that time, Governor Abbott also was deploying the National Guard and the Texas Game and Fish Wardens to the border. And it, like Hector said, it was a political stunt, absolutely. I saw it firsthand. I interviewed families who were coming over from Central America who were sharing with me terrible traumas and terrible conditions in their home countries that they were fleeing from. And to be met with militarization when they came here to America is wrong, and it is scary, and it adds to their trauma. And so what I see should be happening between the state and the federal government is a collaboration to fix our asylum process. People who are coming here from Central America, many of the folks who are currently coming to the border are exercising their legal right to seek asylum in this country. It is a legal right. And so we need to make the asylum system faster. We need to reform it so that we treat people with dignity and welcome them with dignity. I think the state should be providing support to the non-governmental organizations on the ground in Yuma and Nogales who are welcoming people with dignity, making sure they have a meal to eat, a place to get a change of clothes. Those are really crucial ways to ensure that people get here safely and can then exercise their legal right to seek asylum. So that is something that I support and that I have firsthand experience seeing what happens when a politician like Governor Abbott does a political stunt, sends the National Guard to the border to really just make headlines. And it doesn't work, it's ineffective, it's a waste of taxpayer dollars, and it is harmful to those people who have already gone through a lot of traumas trying to get here to the United States.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Abetia.
Yes, so the border is a federal policy, and the burden of managing the border shouldn't be placed on the state government. We shouldn't be sending the National Guard to the border, but if we are sending them to the border, I think we should be sending them to build new schools in the border towns. Some of these existing schools are in desperate need of repair and replacement, and the state of our education and the infrastructure is a true crisis at the border. Along with the war on drugs, I also believe that we are too tough on crime, and we see that that idea fails time and time again. And to really fix this issue, we need to address these issues. And sending the National Guard is not going to do that. Currently, the issue that is happening in Texas, that is inhumane, and I do not believe that Arizona should follow in those steps.
Okay, thank you. Move on to the next question. We're going to go to Ms. Ortiz, and you're going to bear with me while I pull this up on my screen because it was there just a moment ago. Okay, so we've had refugees from around the world who've been resettled here in Arizona, and our leaders from both parties have welcomed that. So the question is, do you think Arizona should continue refugee resettlement, and what, if any, limits should there be?
Absolutely, we should continue doing refugee resettlement. I am so proud to know that many school districts like Cartwright have these strong programs, especially for refugee children, to be able to come here and get started on a strong education. I think that it makes our communities richer, and it makes our culture stronger. And so I absolutely support these programs and want to see a continuation of it.
Okay. Ms. Abetia.
Yes, like Ms. Ortiz said, in Cartwright, we are with open arms welcoming our refugees, families, and their scholars. We are And just recently, we are creating a program within the year to provide language classes and to provide information from the district in multiple languages to our families. We're providing backpacks and uniforms and clothing, food, all of the resources needed to help get them settled into our community, but also along into our schools. I also, when I worked in the Glendale Elementary School District, they were already working with a heavy population of refugees. And the most beautiful thing that came out of it were certain holidays that fell around some of their cultures. The whole school got to participate in that as far as what we were eating for lunch. And so these things can be beautiful. And I think that it's very important for our state and our country to continue to open our arms to these refugees.
Okay, Mr. Jaramillo.
I absolutely agree. And I am proud to live in a district where we have school districts welcoming refugees with open arms and love. Refugees make our country great and stronger. We already have a lot of job openings here in Arizona that aren't being filled. When we welcome refugees, they come in, they stimulate the economy, they pay taxes. It's good for everybody. And I'm more than happy to accept more.
Okay, thank you. During the last presidential administration, a significant number of new miles of border wall were built along the US-Mexico border in Arizona. But as we all know, not as much new border wall was built as our former president and some Republican politicians would have liked. So the question is, do you think the state of Arizona should continue the project of building the border wall? Should the state take no action? Or should the state actively work to take down some of the wall that was built during the Trump administration? And I think we're starting with Ms. Abetia again.
Yes, so I don't agree with continuing the border wall at our borders. Maryville, Glendale, this is a heavy a community of Latinos who came here to the States to provide for their families and create better lives. I think building up a wall is a scare tactic that the GOP wants to in place to instill fear on immigrant families. And with having mixed status backgrounds here in our community, it does install that fear. And it continues on the administration of Arpaio, and students specifically in Maryville and multiple schools in the Phoenix Union walked out on election day in November of 2016 to vote him and his administration out because they did not want to see these attacks on not only the community of Arizona, but the community of Mexico. And we need to continue to keep the relationship between Mexico a positive relationship, and building a wall is just a scare tactic. And I don't think that we should be building a wall on our borders.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jaramillo.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. I am strongly against the wall. As Anna said, it is a scare tactic. And not only is it a scare tactic, it's a waste of taxpayer money. What good is a wall when ladders exist? There's chunks of that wall that are open. And in many cases, some of the wall has gone through private property along the border. And that's why I'm against the wall, and I'm for tearing the wall down, because it's a violation of your rights, some of those people's constitutional rights to have property. And I am adamantly against the wall. It's not right, and it's used as a scare tactic against us Latino people.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Ortiz.
Yes, we need to tear down the wall. There is no reason to have it other than to continue the anti-immigrant and the anti-Latino rhetoric that should stay in the past. It is an ugly part of our history, and the wall serves as a reminder. It's not needed. And I lived along the Texas-Mexico border where there was a wall, which they would call a levee, and it doesn't do anything. And it also, it's a symbol of hate. And for so many mixed status families or people who just happen to live in one country and work in another They go back and forth, and the border is a beautiful place of two different cultures coming together, and we should celebrate that. And so I absolutely think that we should do the work to tear down the wall, and it will also have positive environmental impacts because we know that the wall disrupted ecosystems, and that's wrong as well. So yes, I support getting rid of the wall, not bringing it back, leaving that chapter in the past.
All right, thank you. Ms. Abeti, I'd like to briefly follow up with you. I heard from you, no new border wall. Some of our other candidates here say the state should be tearing it down. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. I also know that there are Native American communities, and they're divided between the border of the states and Mexico already, and building up that wall and continuing to build up that wall does put a divide between that community as well. And I don't think that we should be doing that.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to a few questions about politics and how our legislative system works here in Arizona. So the first question in this category is going to go first to Mr. Jaramillo. And our voter wrote in, do you believe that we need term limits to end lifetime careers for politicians? And if so, what length of time would you recommend for new term limitations? And I would briefly add, could you specifically talk about here in the Arizona House of Representatives?
So term limits, I think I do support term limits. I don't think someone should be living off of taxpayer provided salaries for their entire lives here in Arizona. What I've come to find out about some politicians is that when they get elected, they do nothing. And they just sit, don't attend legislative meetings, they don't attend votes. And sometimes they use their position to accrue money. I'm definitely in support. And for how long? Now that's a discussion I feel that needs more deeper conversation.
Okay, Ms. Ortiz.
Yeah, here in Arizona, we have, the 2-year terms, and then a person can serve in the House. But then often what we see is once somebody has served out their term in the House, they go to the Senate and then back again and then back again. And I do think that we should critically assess whether that is beneficial to the long-term health of our democracy in our state. I think there are far too many people who do get comfortable and forget the accountability factor and forget who they work for. And so I am open to a discussion about what another system could look like for the legislature here in Arizona.
Okay. Elizabeth.
Yes, I do agree with term limits. I myself, being a young person involved in democratic politics, one thing that I am strong about is bringing out more young people to fill in these roles of leadership, whether that's being our, young LD chair, or running for elected position like this, or for school board, for city council, any of these positions. And when we don't have term limits, it makes it impossible for young people to be able to step into these roles. And I don't think that older people, or even for myself, being young and continuing on with this till I get to an older age, it should just be left on the burden of those that are continuing to run for office. I think that these term limits should be in place to encourage more young people to step into these roles and to run for office.
Okay, well, that's a great segue into our next question. A voter wrote in about representation in the legislature and asked, do you think it's important for this district to be represented by young people, by women, by people of color? And we'll go to Ms. Ortiz first on that one.
Absolutely. Our district is a much younger district than others. There are a lot of young families who live here, and it is a Latino majority district. So I think it's very important that we have adequate representation and we have bold fighters who are going to listen to our communities. I think that is one of the most important things. And I will be that elected official who is always available and easily accessible to listen to the needs of the community and to take action. And that is the kind of bold representation that we need, where it is not just one elected official making decisions, but an elected official who will bring the community to the decision-making table. And that is what I intend to do.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Avetia.
So before I answer this question, I want to tell a short story. I recently had a conversation with my Nana about all of the work that Dolores Huerta and Helen Chavez did alongside civil rights activist Cesar Chavez. I asked her, Nana, why are these two women not the face of the movement compared to Cesar Chavez? And she explained that, back in those days that it was inappropriate for women to be in front of their husbands and to speak ahead of their husbands or ahead of the man. So although I have always respected these two women for the work here in Arizona, for the work that they've done here in Arizona, after having this conversation, I truly knew the importance of what it means for not only myself, but for all of us Latinas and women of color that are currently running for office and hold an elected position. I also believe that women are the backbone of this community, but especially women of color. We're expected to raise kids, take care of the house, make sure that there's a hot meal on the table every day. And with today's society, we continue to do those things, but we add more to our plate. We are continuing our education, pursuing our careers, and people like to say things like, you can't do it all, yet women of color tend to prove people wrong on that. So I know firsthand that it isn't easy being a woman of color, especially a Latina, but we need to be representing the district that has more equity and providing for Maryville and Glendale, but also showing other young women out there that it is possible for us to be the leaders of these positions.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Jaramillo.
Thank you. It's absolutely important that people feel represented, especially in a district that is majority Latinos. And it's important that we elect people that look like us. Not only is that important, but it's also important that we elect people that fight for our rights, that fight for reproductive rights, that fight for Latino rights, immigrant rights, all of those rights. Because at the end of the day, you can elect someone that looks like you, but you got to make sure they have the same ideals as you, that they have your well-being in mind when they make decisions at the Capitol.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to combine a couple of voters' questions on this next one. We have some folks writing in about money and politics, and they want to know, have you taken any donations or payments from NGOs or unions, or have any of those organizations approached you about compensating you if you were to take office? And for this one, we'll start with Ms. Avetia.
So I am actually a clean elections candidate, so I cannot accept any monies from PACs, corporations, businesses. The only type of endorsement that I can receive from unions and organizations is just saying that we support this person or this candidate running for office. So no, I am not taking any money, any special interest money at my election. The way that my campaign is funded is by $5 contributions from registered voters within the district, and then seed money, which a single individual can donate up to $180. Once I receive $323, I cannot collect any more money, and the Clean Elections Department or Clean Elections Commission helps me fund my campaign. So in total that I'm going to be working with in my campaign is about $30,000. And I want to make that very clear to the voters that I do not accept anything other than that in my election.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jaramillo.
I'm running a grassroots campaign. I'm only taking personal contributions. I have not taken any big money, corporate money, PAC money, and I will decline to take any of that. One of the things I believe is that money has a corrupting influence in politics today. And we happen to see that in the federal, at the federal level with some senators. To prevent that, I'm only accepting personal contributions.
Okay, just to follow up quickly on that, and I would encourage any voters who are watching this and interested in this question, all these folks are going to be filing financial disclosures as well. So that's a great way to see where their money is coming from. But Mr. Jaramillo, you mentioned not taking any corporate money, but specifically any nonprofit organizations or union donations?
I have not been approached by any unions or nonprofit organizations.
Okay, and Ms. Ortiz.
I am refusing to accept corporate PAC money, and the vast majority of my donations are small dollar personal contributions. I am proud to be endorsed and supported financially by the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, which is comprised of essential workers who kept our communities going during the pandemic, and I was very honored to earn their endorsement. I also am endorsed and have accepted a financial contribution from Arizona List, which is a nonprofit which ensures that pro-choice Democratic women are elected to state office. And this is critically important with the news that just came out this week that the Supreme Court is expected to overturn our right to access reproductive health care. As a young woman, that news shook me to my core. It is critical that we have strong fighters like myself who have a proven record of successfully defeating bills at the legislature that would have restricted our right to access reproductive health care. And I am ready to take on that fight alongside the members and the community leaders who are supported by Arizona List as well.
All right, well, I'm glad you brought up the news of the week, and we'll get to that just shortly in our next section. But I've got one more question about politics for you guys. And this one, we're going to go to Mr. Jaramillo first. Candidates at many levels in Arizona can use the eQual online signature gathering system to collect petition signatures. Do you support expanding the eQual system to all forms of petitioning in Arizona, including for ballot initiatives and new party recognition? And what would you do to ensure equity in ballot access?
Absolutely. eQual is such a convenient tool to use. It makes these ballot initiatives thousands of times easier. If you support an idea, it can be advertised online. And if people support that idea, they'll sign the ballot instead of people having to physically walk to a house in order to spread the message. So I support eQual being expanded, and I will support to invest in it as well.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ortiz.
Absolutely. I support expanding equal access for our ballot initiative system. I think our ballot initiative system is one of the greatest things about Arizona. It helped us pass some awesome initiatives like raising the minimum wage and passing Prop 208, even though that was ultimately unsuccessful because of anti-public education actors who did everything they could to attack our democracy. So I think that expanding equal will only make our democracy stronger and make it easier for more people to participate and sign on to ballot initiatives that they care about.
Okay. Ms. Abetia.
I also agree. As somebody who managed the campaigns for Invest in Ed and the legalization of marijuana, we also had other ballot initiatives that were out there, and having a ballot petitioners out there collecting for 4 or 5 ballot initiatives at a time. Although they did amazing work and they were able to get it on the ballot, those are tirelessly hours that we were out there, and we could have done so much more if we just had an easier tool to use. And the biggest thing about these ballot initiatives is this is the voters' way of getting law passed when the legislator is not doing their job. And this is the people taking the power into their own hands. So not allowing them more access to have power, the math there doesn't equal up. We need to make sure that people have access to be able to sign for the candidates that they believe in, and especially for the ballot initiatives.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Jaramillo, you want to add something there?
Yeah, can I just add that eQual, not only is it a tool of democracy, but it increases access to people with disabilities. I was canvassing out in the neighborhood, and there was a person that wanted to sign my give me a signature to get me on the ballot, but they couldn't because they had boundaries and they weren't allowed to go outside, and I wasn't allowed to go inside. So I gave them a link to eQual, and that actually helped them give me their signature. So disability rights.
Okay. All right. I'm actually just going to sneak in sort of one more question on a similar theme that just came in from a voter who asked, if Republicans win the majority again this year in the Arizona legislature, and I would add that based on the maps and candidates, that's all but guaranteed, what would you do to work across the aisle to pass bipartisan legislation? And if you'd like, can you name one piece of legislation that you would introduce in office that you think could get support from the other side of the aisle. We'll start for this one with Mr. Jaramillo.
So what I would do to go across the aisle is talk to lawmakers, because all of these issues, they're not left or right issues, they're up and down issues. When you go to your work, not everyone there is a Democrat, not everyone there is a Republican. Your neighborhoods, everyone lives there. When you go to the grocery store, there's Republicans and Democrats everywhere. So these issues, we all have them. We live in the same homes. We have the same housing issues, the same job problems, lack of union rights, low paying salaries. So that's how I would approach someone on the other side of the aisle, is that these aren't left or right issues. They're issues that affect working and middle class people. One issue that I would work on definitely is water. Like I said before, I think that's the most pressing issue, because if we ignore it, again, we cease to exist.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ortiz.
I have a proven record of working across the aisle to get things done. Through my past work at a civil rights organization, I successfully advocated for the Dignity for Incarcerated Women's Act to be signed into law. I played a key role in that. And how we did that was by building a broad coalition of bipartisan support from outside the Capitol to work with lawmakers from both parties to help them understand how this bill would impact women who are in our prison systems, especially women who are pregnant in prison. This bill requires DOC to give them prenatal care and to make sure that they have additional time to stay with their newborn once they give birth. And we were able to get this bill signed by Governor Ducey through conversations and making sure that people who were most directly impacted, women who had been to prison, who had given birth in prison and had loved ones inside, were having those conversations with lawmakers and really showing them what the impact of this bill would have. So those are the kind of tactics that I've used in the past that have been successful to get bipartisan support. And as your state representative, one issue I would love to work on, which I believe could garner strong bipartisan support, is making childcare more accessible and affordable, making sure that we restore funding to childcare subsidies. And because there are so many families who need access to childcare, and it will help them be stronger economically. And there are Republicans who should be getting on board with that. And that also includes making sure that we are providing assistance to grandparents who are raising their grandkids, because currently they do not get as much funding from the state as foster parents. And so that's another initiative I would really like to see for the many grandparents in our community who have stepped up to take on parenting responsibilities for their grandchildren.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Abetia.
So I think the best way to work across the aisle and help get some legislation passed is working on things that are not necessarily, Republican based or Democratic based, something that is relatable for both sides of the aisle, right? When we're talking about the struggle that our communities have on burying our loved ones, especially with the COVID pandemic, everybody has suffered from that, regardless of what party affiliation you are. And I think everyone knows the financial burden that can come across a family when somebody has passed away. I also think that we need to have a conversation about affordable housing across the aisle, because that is something that, regardless of where you live in Arizona, that is something that people are struggling with. So bringing up these issues that are not necessarily, party-based issues that people might tend to look at, but more of things that are everyday people issues, everyday family issues, things that both sides of the aisle can agree on, that, we are struggling when it comes to the loss of our loved ones. We are struggling when it comes to housing and financial aid, and we need to find solutions together to be able to provide for our communities.
All right. Thank you. Well, I've got 3 questions for you all related to healthcare, and then we're going to wrap things up because we're already nearing the 90-minute mark. But as our candidates, and I'm assuming our viewers, as well are well aware, there was news from the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. earlier this week, further indicating that we may be heading towards a world in which the precedent of Roe v. Wade is struck down. So I'd like to ask each of you folks, what specific actions would you take as a legislator? And I'd really ask you to be concrete here with respect to abortion in the state of Arizona. And we'll start with Ms. Ortiz on this one.
I have a record of successfully advocating to defeat bills that would have further restricted our right to access abortion care. And so I want to be very clear that when Roe v. Wade falls, there is a law in Arizona that will make it a felony to perform an abortion or assist someone with getting an abortion. This means we could see doctors imprisoned. We can see people who are driving their loved one to an appointment out of state imprisoned. It is critical that we overturn that archaic law, which has absolutely no place in our society, because the government should not be interfering with a person's very personal medical decision. And we all have a basic right to decide for ourselves when to become a parent or grow our families. I also will fight hard to ensure that people are not imprisoned for their healthcare decisions, and that people just should not be forced to give birth against their will. We need to have proactive legislation to codify protections to abortion access into our state constitution. That's critically important as well, so that we stop seeing these bills and having to play defense all the time. And then finally, we need to make sure that parents who people who want to become parents and people who want to grow their families are able to access the resources they need to have a healthy pregnancy and a thriving family, including quality and affordable healthcare, childcare, and housing.
All right, thank you. Ms. Abeitia.
So currently, Roe is the law of the land, and the federal law supersedes state law here in Arizona. And I really strongly believe that if Roe versus Wade is taken away, we do need to come with a state law that does provide better healthcare access for our community. If Roe versus Wade is taken away, I am going to be fighting down at the legislature for this, along with our federal government, because this is something that shouldn't be taken away from our community. I do believe that women's health is a key component to majority of our healthcare system. For myself, for example, I have always been on birth control from a very young age, and sometimes not having access to those needs can stress a person out, along with not having access to contraceptives like condoms or even Plan B. And we need to make these things accessible for women, along with making it free for women to have pads and tampons and menstrual needs, because these are healthcare needs here in Arizona.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Jaramillo.
A doctor's office is not big enough for a woman, her doctor, and the government of the United States. Abortion is healthcare. Healthcare is a human right. I'm a strong supporter of reproductive rights and the right to choose. I don't believe that any government entity should have any say in any private medical appointments. Men should not have any say in what a woman can do with her body. And let me be clear again that abortion is a human right. And with abortion, contraceptives should be readily available as well. Like Anna said, tampons, condoms, pads should be readily available for any person that needs it. And these are things that contribute to the tax on women for just existing. I've grown up in a household full of women, and they have told me time and time again how many issues they face just for being women, and it's not right. We need to codify laws to protect abortion and elect county attorneys that won't prosecute people for wanting abortion.
All right, thank you. I'm hearing a lot from all of you about fighting to maintain women's right to obtain an abortion in Arizona. But our next question is, do you think any restrictions on abortion can be justified? And if so, what would those be? So First, that will go for you, Ms. Abetia.
Is that question saying like abortion shouldn't happen and with the exception of X, Y, and Z? Is that what the question is being framed?
The question is, can any restrictions on abortion be justified? I think this is asking for your ethical stance, not necessarily legal.
I mean, I believe that abortion is a woman's healthcare right, regardless of at what stage of a pregnancy. Abortion is healthcare. I don't think that there's any exceptions into abortion.
Okay, Mr. Jaramillo.
There should be no restrictions on abortion. A politician shouldn't be involved in an appointment between someone a politician should not be involved in the appointment between a doctor and someone who's about to have birth.
Okay, and Ms. Ortiz.
I do not believe in any restrictions for abortion care. We need to ensure that all people have the autonomy and the freedom to plan for their family and their future.
All right. Okay, we'll move to our last question before we go on ahead to closing statements. And we had a voter who asks, do you think that terminally ill adults, should have the right to obtain a prescription for a life-ending drug? If not, what would you say to someone who's terminally ill, facing weeks of pain and suffering? And we'll start with Mr. Jaramillo on this one.
So mental health is a big issue for me. I've had a family friend, a veteran, served several tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they had an encounter with the police, and it ended with the end of their life. And so a conversation like that requires much more time than we've been slotted here. It needs deeper conversation. And again, I think that should be a conversation for a doctor, a mental health specialist, and a patient, and a politician should not be involved at all.
Okay. Ms. Ortiz.
This is an incredibly painful question because I can never imagine what it would be like to be in that position. And for that reason, I believe the government should not interfere in that kind of decision, that it needs to be a conversation between a person, their family, their doctor, their mental health care provider. And the government needs to stay out of those personal and private and painful medical decisions.
Thank you. Ms. Abetia.
So I myself suffer from mental health. I have anxiety, depression, and psychosis, and I have struggled with this since I was a teenager. I have attempted suicide more than once, and although it is something difficult to talk about, it is something that I know has brought me to where I am today, which is why I'm not shy to beat around what it is for me. But I do know the experience of suffering from depression and wanting to end your life. And I believe that a government shouldn't be involved in this decision. It is a difficult conversation because I can say there is a point in my life where I would agree, let me take the pill and let me move on. But also I can agree that, there's a better road ahead, and there are things to look forward to. But I also am not the person that is dealing with that issue and that crisis. So that is not my decision to make. I would not have wanted somebody else to make that decision for me. And I do know that in our mental health system, if you do commit suicide or attempt to commit suicide, you are automatically, they're responsible to admit you into a behavioral health clinic, and you are pretty much forced to receive treatment. And I do think that there needs to be better programs as far as when it comes to mental health and certain illnesses that are life-threatening illnesses that would want somebody to pursue that. But I don't agree that the government should be involved because it is a tough and difficult decision and place where a person is at for themselves to have so many other people making a decision for them. So I do agree that the government should not be involved in this decision.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Hatter, you can follow up. I actually have a sort of a follow-up question for everyone on that. So if I could just ask that, and if it's not related to what you've got to say, go ahead. But I want to make sure that this voter gets their question answered, because I've heard from you folks about keeping the government out of these decisions, but also letting individuals and their health providers make the right decision for them. So I think there's a question about legislation that would specifically allow for medication that's known as medical aid in dying. And could you specifically say whether you would support that legislation? Maybe we'll go to Mr. Jaramillo first, because you had your hand raised.
So there's legislation that's being passed that would support this.
No, this is a proposal. This hasn't advanced in this
Would I
session.
support this proposal?
Would you support this proposal?
That's a difficult question now. I was gonna say I've also had a friend who attempted to commit suicide. So I've been I've journeyed across behavioral institutions with him, providing him support. And this was going back what Anna was saying. I just wanted to mention that these behavioral facilities are severely underfunded and the staff is not adequately paid. And I think they need help and more training, because the situation there is not pretty and it could be better. As for the legislation being proposed, that's a difficult decision. I think I would have to consult with some of my psychologist friends and go over some research and findings before I would support such an important piece of legislation.
Okay, we'll just quickly go. Ms. Ortiz, do you support legislation that would affirmatively create a right to medical aid in dying?
People living with life-threatening illnesses or debilitating pain need to be at the center of this conversation. I would have those conversations and follow their lead on what they believe is best and what medical professionals believe is best as well.
Ms. Abeitia.
I agree. I think we need to bring in the medical professionals into these conversations. If I can't say that I would pass or help pass this legislation without actually looking to see what it entails, just because sometimes legislation is tricky and there are loopholes into things, and I would want to make sure that we are providing the best care and the best safety for those with terminally ill diseases like cancer. So it depends on what the legislation actually looks like, but I think it ultimately depends on how many healthcare professionals are involved in the conversation as well.
All right, thank you. Well, that wraps up the questions that we're going to pose this evening. So thank you all for providing so much information about your positions and plans in the upcoming year. We're going to go now to closing statements. I'm concerned I've lost track of the order, but I believe that Ms. Ortiz is due next to go first. So I'll give you all a minute, and I'd encourage you to give any website or other contact information where voters can reach out to you if they have more questions as well. So Ms. Ortiz, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for watching. I'm Annalise Ortiz. I might have stopped by your door to introduce myself already, but if I haven't, I do hope to make it to your door soon. I am running to be your next state representative because I deeply love this state and our community. I have a proven record of advocating for the needs of hardworking families. It's how I've earned the endorsement and support of leaders like Senator Martin Quesada and Representative Richard Andrade, and the endorsements of labor unions like UFCW, Unite Here, and the Communications Workers of America. But the most important support that I need is your vote. You have my commitment that I will always be accessible to you. I will never forget who I work for, and I will always take action for you. I will fight hard to invest in our public schools, make housing affordable, and protect our civil rights. And I am asking for your vote on or before August 2nd. If you want to get involved in the campaign and help us through to Election Day, visit my website at ortizforaz.com. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Abeitia.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Anna Abeitia. I am running to be your next representative of LD24 here in Maryville and Glendale. Again, I am a product of the district. Being a governing board member in the Cartwright School District is really what pushed me to run for this position. And even prior to that, this was something that I've never really thought that I wanted to do. I knew that being one of the only young people here in the district that is actively engaged in my community, it was important for me to stand up. Also, being a young Latina, I want other young Latinas and women of color to be able to understand the importance of our roles in our community. I have been out talking to voters, knocking on doors and engaging them in our election. And I'm continuing to do so up until August 2nd at 7 o'clock when ballots are due to be turned in. I think the most important things here in this election are going to be the conversation of education, affordable housing, healthcare, mental health care. And I also want to bring in more investment into our community. So instead of gentrifying our community, I want to beautify our community. I want to bring in more programs that relate to arts and more community events in Maryville. I would love to have a Maryville Monday, similar to like a First Friday. And I think those would be tremendous things that we can do with our community as far as bringing more people into our community to see who we really are. The best ways to get involved with my campaign, you can reach out to my email. It is Abeytia, ABEYTIA, FORAZ@gmail.com. My phone number is 480-909-7030. And we are always looking for volunteers to come out and canvass with us and knock on doors and talk to voters. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And our last closing statement will be from Mr. Jaramillo.
My name is Hector Jaramillo. Like I said before, I was born to two immigrant parents. My mom and dad struggled. Despite having multiple jobs, my dad would sometimes go without a meal so that my mom and I could be well fed. This is the reality that many families in District 24 face. I'm fighting for our right to afford high quality healthcare, to afford the medical treatment we need. I'm fighting for public school teachers and classrooms. They need money. They need more money and resources. I'm fighting for LGBTQIA+ rights. We must stand together and protect each other from discrimination. I'm fighting to conserve our water so that we can continue to thrive in Arizona. I'm running to increase the minimum wage so that the standard of living for all Arizonans goes up. Our campaign's measurement of success will be based on these fights. It's not whether I win or lose or even about my political career again. It's about the issues. Putting the needs of the community first, like what my dad did for our family, is exactly why I'm running to represent District 24. You can reach me directly on any social media at HEC4AZ, that's HEC, the number 4, and then AZ. Anna, I want to be more involved with Maryville Monday. That sounds so fun. I just wanted to add that because I heard that and I was like, that sounds like such a great idea. So please reach out to me when you start doing that.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Jaramillo. And with that, we'll conclude our debate this evening. So to our candidates, thank you so much for participating. To the voters, we thank all of you who took the time to watch the debate tonight and form yourselves before the August 2nd primary election. And a special thank you to those who submitted questions. If you submitted a question and I didn't ask it tonight, I would encourage you to reach out to the candidates who just shared the ways that you can get in touch with their campaigns and hopefully start a dialogue that way. As a reminder, the voter registration deadline is July 5th and early voting begins July 6th. All registered voters, including independent voters, can participate in the primary, and we encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information. Thank you.